Hi, and welcome to Dark Window. I'm your host, Jim Mann. Here on this program, I will be talking with many of the leading investigators, researchers, and authors on the topics of UFOs, UAPs, alien abductions, extraterrestrials, and a host of many other fascinating and related topics. So please join me and my guest for the next hour as we reach out. This is Dark Window on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. And hello, everyone. I'm Jim Mann, your host here on Dark Window. Today I have a guest. He is a MUFON person. Not only is he a MUFON person, but he is an administrator. He's a director of investigations, international. Bob is, he's a STAR team member. He's the director of the International Case Assistant Group, which is called CAG, C-A-G. He's investigated over 400 cases, but best of all, again, he's the International Director of Investigations for the MUFON organization. And he's here to talk to us about a lot of cases, and particularly these balloons that we've heard about. Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you? Thank you for having me on, Jim.
I'm doing great. So, we've got a lot of to talk about here. We've got so many cases that we can talk about. 400 cases, Bob. And not only that, you do international. So how long have you been with MUFON?
I started as a field investigator in 2014. I think I joined in 2013, and I sent for the book, and in April of 2014, I became a field investigator.
So a little bit about your background. What got you involved in MUFON? Why did you come this direction?
Well, when I was a kid, in 1965, we had the great Northeastern blackout in November of 1965. And the next day, I remember I was 6 years old. I remember my uncle coming over going, they think UFOs were seen right before the blackout over the power station in Niagara Falls. And it turned out that there were about 7 UFO reports that night near the Clay Power Station, which was the cause of the blackout. So I started buying the comic books, the UFO comic books, Gold Key comic books. In 5th grade, my uncle bought me Chariots of the Gods when it came out. 1986, I had my first UFO sighting. It was an orb over a lake. I was camping in a remote part of New Jersey, and it was raining. I was sitting on an overturned canoe on the beach of this man-made lake, and I saw this pink star coming across the lake in the middle of the night. I'm out there by myself, and I'm saying, can't be a star because it's under heavy cloud cover. It's raining. All of a sudden, it drops, stops, does a semicircle, stops, and takes off so fast it left a streak halfway across the sky. And I was like, what was that? So in 2013, I was looking at books, and I came across Terry Ray's book about orbs, the complete story of the worldwide invasion of orange orbs. And I went, my God, somebody else has seen these things? And I bought the book, and that's what triggered me to join MUFON, because I wanted to talk to him because he was a MUFON field investigator. And then I had 2 other minor but interesting occasions. Once I was on a train heading from Jersey City to Newark, and it's all meadowlands. And pacing the train at 60 miles an hour at about 2,000 feet up, maybe 1,000 feet away, was a silver orb that had to be probably the size of a car. I was just pacing a train in the middle of nowhere, and I thought that was just fascinating. But the weirdest thing I ever saw was coming back from Quebec. I was going through the Adirondack State Park, which is like a dead zone. There's nothing for miles and miles till you hit Lake Placid. And I came to a clearing in the forest, and off to the right side of me was a sheer cliff in the mountains, the Adirondack Mountains. And I saw this thing, it looked like a tank climbing up the side of the cliff. It wasn't technically a UFO, but it was this massive tank-like machine doing a vertical climb up the side of a cliff in absolutely the middle of nowhere. I did a U-turn, went back to try to find it, but it was gone. But I am totally convinced, whether or not it's aliens or time travelers or anything else, that something is going on.
So you've seen a lot of pretty fabulous things, and that's why you're here in MUFON. But now once you're the International Director of Investigations, What can you tell us? Something that would be interesting. I mean, 400 cases, Bob.
Well,
That's
not
a
all of
lot.
them were international. I became an international director about 2.5 years ago. Uh,
Okay.
but by far the most interesting report that I have seen on the international side was the March 2020 FedEx airplane that was paced by an orb for 33 minutes. It was taking auto parts from Mexico City to Tennessee. Um, and this orb came down on the left side of the plane from above and began pacing them at 560 miles per hour for 33 minutes. And the pilot, Eric Delgado, was a former fighter pilot, and he had been at FedEx for 20 years. He's a very calm guy. He had the wherewithal to shut off the cockpit lights, start filming the orb outside his window, and then he panned down to his TCAS anti-collision radar to show that there was nothing there. You can hear him say, flip the switch up, flip the switch down to see if there was anything above or below his plane. Absolutely nothing. And then he panned back to the object right outside his window. The most interesting part of the case was that when the object reached the Mexican United States border, it made a left turn. It would not cross the border. So it was definitely not some sort of weather phenomenon like ball lightning
Exactly.
that was magnetically attracted to the plane, for example. I've always wondered, was it really auto parts that were in that plane? You know,
Yeah. So, Bob, you've sent me a bunch of pictures here. We've got them over here. You've got some cases and some objects you'd like to talk to us about a little bit. So, can we get started on that? What is that?
Yeah, wait. Okay. Let,
Well, no, go ahead.
I'll build up to it. I'll build up to it. Basically, the Chinese balloon
Let's talk about the balloon.
situation. Yeah, it was certainly a Chinese balloon, and MUFON has had some very fine investigators looking into what are probably other incidences of Chinese balloons. Steve Hudgens, uh, who is director of investigations for all of MUFON, Seth Feinstein in Colorado. They've
Mhm.
done some really good work. There's no doubt that MUFON witnesses have captured spy balloons prior to this event. The thing that interested me was that we've only seen footage of the Chinese balloon being shot down, but there were three other shoot downs. There was one over the Yukon near Dawson, Canada. There was one over Alaska, and there was one over Lake Huron on near the Upper Michigan Peninsula. And nobody has ever seen any of the shoot down footage from those cases, and it makes you wonder why. All right, the one over Lake Huron interested me most because the pilot described it as octagonal. The pilot also couldn't identify what it was, and they've tried to say that it was a Pico weather balloon, but Pico weather balloons are not octagons. The third, it interfered with his instrumentation in his cockpit. I forget if he was the F-35 or the F-22, but this is the most sophisticated airplanes, that the world has ever seen, and a Pico balloon would not interfere with the instrumentation of a fighter jet for sure. So I think that there was something more to it. So I decided to take a deep dive into the MUFON CMS and see and do a search for octagons and hexagons and pentagons, things that weren't your traditional triangles or spheres or whatever. And what I found was fairly interesting. Now, if you want to put up the first picture, this is from Milano, Texas in 2016. And there's actually a video that goes along with this. Basically, a mother and her adult son were driving in a car and they were being followed by this object. The son begins filming it and it's chasing them. And you can actually hear the terror in the woman's voice as they're driving because the son keeps telling her, slow down, I want to take the video. And she's going, no, no, we got to get out of here. It's very, very scary. But they also gave me a graphic representation of what they saw. And that's clearly not your standard looking UFO. But it ends up getting more interesting than that because I found several more cases that were very similar. I have another picture of an octagon. This one was from Sun City, California. The witness described this object, and they drew an illustration of it, and a pretty good one. All of the illustrations I'm going to show you so far on these octagons are very, very well done by the witnesses. This thing appeared over their car, and the witness believed that it was 60 feet in diameter. The interesting thing that you're going to see as we move along through here is that the lights on the bottoms of all of these octagons were orange, yellow, and red, and the different patterns they do suggest that there's something important about the sequencing of the lights on the bottom of the craft. The next report was, I, yes, this one was from California also. This one was from Hollywood, and this was a year later. I'd say it was 100 miles from the other sighting that I just showed you. This object was also an octagon, about 60 feet in diameter, and again hovered over the witness's car. Besides the fact that these have yellow, orange, and red lights on the bottom of them, they were also absolutely silent. So whatever the propulsion system is for these objects, absolutely silent. The lighting configurations on the bottom are interesting, and all of these octagons are about 60 feet in diameter. Okay, so if you want to keep going, I'll show you some more. This one is the clincher for me. It's actually a round object that the person saw, but the lighting configuration on the bottom was a huge one, two, three, four, five sextagon, and it was orange, yellow, and red lights. The thing was massive. Now, what's interesting about this is that this happened at 4 o'clock in the morning over Louisville, Kentucky. For those people in your audience that aren't familiar with the MADAR system that Fran Ridge from NICAP uses, it's a series of very small units that somebody plugs into their cable modem in their house. It checks barometric pressure, it checks changes in the magnetic field of the Earth. And the purpose of it is to see if things might be coming in and out of the atmosphere. And then we look to see if a hit on a MADAR unit would match a MUFON report. And in this case, with the Louisville incident, this spectacular looking round object with the sextagon lighting configuration on the bottom of it, within 1 minute of this person's encounter, this MUFON witness's encounter, the person who operates the Louisville, Kentucky MADAR unit had a major hit. So it is quite indicative that whatever this thing was, it obviously breached the atmosphere and came down fast within a minute of this person seeing it from their car. I find this an extraordinary sighting. So to continue, as we're getting closer and closer to the shoot downs of the objects over Lake Huron, Alaska, and Yukon, Canada, this person saw what appeared to be a massive tic-tac shaped object with two very, very large octagon shaped red lights at each end. And this is interesting because this object was seen in a place called Stony Point, which is several miles west of Edmonton, Canada, in Alberta. And this place, Stony Point, is approximately 1,000 miles south of Dawson, Yukon, which is where the tic-tac shaped object that was shot down over the Yukon was shot down about 1,000 miles north of this location. This object triggered another memory of mine because it seems to be almost a dumbbell shaped lighting configuration. And it reminded me of a case back in 2013 that took place far up in the remote north part of Ontario, Canada, again. And the MUFON Journal actually did a case on it. Bunch of hunters were out in the middle of nowhere, and they see this massive dumbbell shaped object, soundless, just hovering over the forest in the middle of nowhere. When the hunter, who was a scientist, I believe, if I remember correctly, actually tried to videotape it, and the video, when he processed it, was garbled as if it was subjected to a massive electromagnetic field disturbance. However, he was able to put some of the pixels together so that you can roughly see the outline of what this massive object looked like. Now, every year I go through probably all 10,000 cases we get every year, because I do the cases of interest presentation at the MUFON symposiums. It's the last presentation of the weekend, Sunday afternoons, and I look for the 5, 6, 7 best cases of the year. And when I can get field investigators who actually work the case to come to the symposium, I actually let them introduce their case with a PowerPoint presentation. And people really love the presentation. So as I was looking through cases, I came across this next picture. And this, if you looked at the last dumbbell shaped object from a side view, you might interpret this object as being a dumbbell, not seeing the third sphere or disc associated with it. But from a certain angle, this object is almost identical to the one that was from 2013, that blue dumbbell shaped object with the very thin windows and two very large discs separated by a thinner sort of tube between them. I personally believe that this object is of a similar manufacture to the object that was the dumbbell over the remote part of Canada. This was actually from Cary, North Carolina. So it's absolutely two witnesses drawing almost the same type of object. Okay, so let's look at this next map. All right, now, as I told you before, we're in Alberta, Canada, and this is Edmonton, the largest city in Alberta, and to the west of it is Stony Plain. This is where the fellow saw the large tic tac object with the two red octagon lights. This is 1,000 miles south of Dawson, where the tic tac was shot down in the Yukon. Now, I want you to look a little further to the left of the screen, and you'll see a place called Haas Lake. Haas Lake is the scene of a very, very interesting witness video, and I'll do an introduction to it, and then I'm going to ask Jim to play the video. Back in 2016, a fellow with his drone was filming autumn foliage in this very, very remote part of Canada. It's nothing but wolves and pine trees out there. And he was maybe 500 feet up with the drone, just slowly panning, taking pictures of the beautiful autumn foliage, when all of a sudden, whoosh, something comes whizzing by his drone in the middle of nowhere. The object was about this big, it was white, and it was sort of shaped like a foil, an airfoil. Okay, and Jim, I'd like you to play this video, and this video is in slow motion. Okay, and could we play it again? Okay, it seems the object comes from treetop level, right past the drone. Okay, so the drone, the object covers thousands of feet in 3 seconds, and it comes within like 15 feet of the drone, and it's approximately the same size as the drone. But here's the kicker. All right, Dan Palachuk, our national director in Canada, of MUFON Canada, he had a frame by frame breakdown done on this video. And it turns out that this object was going at Mach 8, which is approximately 5,000 miles per hour. So I don't know about you, but I don't know any object that's this big, has no structure to it, no means of propulsion, how it can be going 5,000 miles an hour.
That must have been a streak on that video.
And the thing that I talked about earlier with you is that I have 6 more of those types of videos, and hopefully I can bring you at a later date.
Well, this is pretty interesting. Let's go back to the Louisville picture. I was gonna ask a question. Now, there was a second object with that.
He believes that he saw something like a cigar also, but that it was partially cloaked. All right, so he wasn't able to give a good, really solid description of it. However, the interesting thing about this cigar-shaped ghost object was that in 4 of the other octagon reports, the witness describes that he thought at one point it was partially cloaked. So we have 4 witnesses basically saying that these octagons could partially cloak themselves, as well as this one cigar type object. So we also don't have that type of technology, certainly not on a Pico weather balloon.
So on this one here, now that's huge. You're looking at 8 lanes of highway here.
Mm-hmm. So you figure for 8 lanes of highway, 5 feet per lane, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 50. I'd say that's 60 feet. 60, maybe 80 feet. And plus you have to remember that witnesses are not always exactly right. All right. You have to take their measurements, as ballpark figures. So if a bunch of people are saying it was approximately 60 feet, it could be anywhere from, like, say, 40 to 80 feet, what they were describing.
So, Bob, you're also involved with studying these orange orbs, and I noticed that you mentioned on these like this one here, orange. Why does orange keep appearing on these UFOs?
If you go back to the 60s, John Keel was probably the first person to try to understand that. And he thought that a lot of it might have something to do with the propulsion systems. Or if these objects are coming out of, like, hyperspace or something, they're moving from people see them as, red when they arrive, purple when they're leaving. It could be some sort of propulsion after effect. All right. For example, if we go back to the Mexican FedEx case, all right, the object that the person saw, it was an orb. He said it was like a glowing ball of plasma. All right. But think about this. Ted Rowe from NARCAP, who investigates near collisions of aircraft with unknown objects, his theory on that case was that the object was actually a metallic sphere, and an actual manufactured object of unknown origin, and that it wrapped itself in a plasma on purpose. The reason being is that plasma absorbs radar signals and thus makes something invisible. The United States military now, with the F-35 fighter jets, they're shooting out fields of plasma in front of the plane, so that if they were going to, say, go in on a mission into Iran or something, the Iranian radar and missile units would be looking for the planes, and they would not see them because they'd be hidden behind a plasma screen, which would absorb the radar signal, and it would not see the plane. So if there is somebody else with that technology, and they're wrapping these objects in a plasma, then these things might not be plasma balls at all. They may be actually some sort of radar cloaked, objects that were manufactured by someone, I don't know who.
Let's step back a minute to these balloons. Everything's been in the news. What do you think, Bob? China?
Yes, I mean, if you look at it logically, if you go to websites like the National Interest, the Debrief, you get the sense that China is moving swiftly toward taking Taiwan back. What we do about it, I don't know. If we can do anything about it without getting into a bloody conflict, but they are definitely preparing. They have their satellites shooting down green lidar laser beams into the Pacific Ocean near Hawaii. They're looking for something, or they're looking for some sort of weakness or to freak us out. Uh, as far as the balloons go, they're a very low tech way to sneak a package over Nebraska that might be an electromagnetic pulse weapon that could take out the electrical grid for most of North America, or could release a virus, because they've said in the past they have no qualms if millions of Americans have to die in order for them to regain Taiwan and, world supremacy. So, anything's possible. But I know that NORAD, after the balloon got shot down, they tweaked their systems, okay, because they had not anticipated that the Chinese would try something sneaky like a low tech balloon. That's when I think they realized that there's other stuff going on in the skies, like the thing they shot down in the Yukon, the thing they shot down over Lake Huron, the thing they shot down over Alaska. All right, they got a wake up call, is what I think.
Speaking of the thing they shot down over Lake Huron, we spent, and I say we, I mean the Defense Department, the Air Force, spent 2 air-to-air missiles to shoot down a balloon.
Hmm.
See, most people are going to look at that and say, nonsense. They're not leveling with us.
Hmm.
I mean, they could have took a balloon out of the air with a couple of rounds, seems like. Do you have any sort of a hypothesis on theory?
Yeah, go back to what I said earlier about the pilot's instrumentation was affected. Okay, that tells me that maybe the instrumentation in the Sidewinder missile may have been affected, and they have not found that missile yet. It never exploded. Okay. Um, the other thing is that the initial reports about the object over Lake Huron was in the news, and this was from the Pentagon briefings. The object was unmanned. And my question to you is, if the thing was unmanned, if the it affected the pilot's instruments, it was octagon shaped. He couldn't identify it. All right. They haven't released any FLIR camera footage of it, and they haven't found the wreckage. How would they know it was unmanned? All right. That was a slip up. All right. And you haven't heard that since. All right. So there's something very interesting about that. 2 days ago, there was another interesting story out of Lake Huron.
Oh, really? Okay.
A ship that now the Great Lakes are sort of like a Devil's Triangle type area, okay, where ships have disappeared. Lake Superior, the Edmund Fitzgerald, that whole thing. They just found 2-3 days ago the wreck of a ship that sank 127 years ago in Lake Huron. And as soon as I saw that story, I said, that's very interesting, because that tells me that there's a lot of people scouring the bottom of Lake Huron right now looking for something. And I don't think that they're going to put that much effort into finding a Chinese spy balloon, because they already have one that they recovered from, what was it, South Carolina, North Carolina, off the coast.
Yeah.
So I think that there's an intense underwater search going on right now for this Sidewinder missile and this object. I don't think it was a Chinese balloon at all.
What about the one that was shot down? Was it over Alaska?
The one that was the Tic Tac that seemed to shatter into pieces,
Yeah.
like it was made out of metal. Yeah, they haven't released any footage. When a fighter jet does a combat mission, there is always recorded footage. All right.
Absolutely.
if they're not showing us the footage, it only means two things. They're utterly incompetent and they really did shoot down balloons, all right, hobby balloons, and they're so embarrassed about it, we'll never see the film. Or it was something they totally weren't expecting and it wasn't Chinese. Okay, now they claim they may never be able to find these objects in the Alaska wilderness. They said it was a tic tac shape. They said that it shattered, that it was metal. Let me tell you, if they can find a dime in the middle of the Sahara
Yeah.
Desert with a satellite. It's like they know exactly where that thing crashed. It's whether or not they want us to know about it or not.
I know. It's the problem is that so many people will buy those stories.
Hmm.
Um, so where where do we go from here with these stories? Do we just let them go? Do we pressure our government? I don't want to get into a political conversation here. That's not what. Um, a lot of people thought at first that these things might be UFOs, unidentified. They might be alien craft. But if we shot them down, and I say we, I mean the Air Force. If we shot them down, I just don't believe we shot down advanced alien craft. Um, so, what do we do about this? Do we just sit and let it lay? Do we wait for our government to come clean? Do we put this in the same envelope as we put so many other cases over the years? Do you think we'll ever have any sort of transparency in any of this, Bob?
No. That's the short answer. It's a very complicated answer. It's like they've they've said they've shot them down, but how do we know that they did shoot them down? All right, because we haven't seen any proof that they did shoot them down. So you have to consider that side of it too. So maybe it was extraterrestrial and our missiles didn't do anything to it. All right, maybe they didn't shoot it
Exactly.
down over Alaska. All right, that's the story, the cover story or whatever. So until you know more, we're in the dark. MUFON has submitted several reports to Congress about the Chinese balloon uh, fiasco, and we meet regularly with congressional leaders because we try to be open and transparent, unlike some other entities uh, that want government money and just want to bury the reports. We don't take any money from the government, but we do give Congress reports because I do think that they believe they're being lied to. All right, especially by the military. Disclosure. Will disclosure ever come? I've heard people say, "Well, disclosure's already happened. It's acceptance of it and providing us the evidence." I mean, we have literally a million reports over the last 80 years from CUFOS, NICAP, MUFON, uh, the New Fork. I mean, there's got to be close to a million reports besides all of the books that have been written with reports that aren't in those databases. Okay, what I think is going to happen, and I think we're getting very close to it now, is that we're going to get some sort of statistical disclosure with all of these new AI systems that are coming out. You could what would have taken months, if not years, of research. You can now feed into a computer, and people are probably doing it right now. All right, these laboratories, and it's spitting out all sorts of statistics. I think that very soon the patterns of whatever's been going on for the past 3,500 years are going to become so obvious, all right, that there will be an answer. The question is, will AI ever get cheap enough for me and you to be able to crunch our own data to come up with our own answers, or will it be hidden behind the military and corporations, these answers?
So, in all your years here, or I should say, all the cases that you've done, um, what do you find the most fascinating case that you've ever worked with?
Well, it's hard to say because I'm pretty much a patterns guy. So I don't look at one case in particular as being incredible. I try to find patterns. Okay, uh, and I'll give you a few patterns. Back in 1952, there were an incredible amount of incursions over runways by UFOs, in particular American military bases, in particular SAC bases, Strategic Air Command bases. Uh, Also, a lot of these bases General Eisenhower had visited. So, what's interesting about 1952 military base runway incursions? They peaked in July of 1952. What happened in June of 1952 was that the United States detonated the world's first hydrogen bomb. Later that year in November, General Eisenhower became President Eisenhower. So I don't think that there is any coincidence there, that whoever they are have been watching us for a long, long time, and that they're quite interested in our nuclear capabilities. And back in 1952, the Chinese did not have an air force, and the Russians were not able to use advanced technology to do incursions onto our military bases from the air over North America. Now, other patterns that I've investigated, and I'm writing an article on one right now, are when people who have been abducted or who were contactees claim that when they were brought onto a spaceship, that they see screens, and these screens apparently do different things. In some cases, it's just like a TV console, on the, in the front of an airplane in the cockpit, just a regular monitor. But there's other cases where people believe that they've been laid on a table and that a big machine comes down, goes over their body, and they can see their insides on a big screen, sort of like an X-ray. I have 7, 8, 9 reports of this exact phenomenon. There's also reports of people who believe that they've seen screens come snake out of a forest, open up in front of them, and they see a being like a hologram begin talking to them. I have a dozen of those reports also. But the most interesting patterns that I find with reports with the word screen in them is that people are brought onto a spaceship, ordinary people. They're sat down in front of a huge screen, and then they're shown scenes of Earth's destruction. All right. And you have to ask yourself, why would an alien from another galaxy, let's say, come all the way to Earth just to scare the living daylights out of an unimportant human being by making them watch the end of the world? Okay. And if you go back biblically to the book of Revelations, John, the apostle, believed that a vision opened up to him about the end of the world in his cave. Was he seeing something similar that some of these other people saw 2,000 years later? But screens play a very big role in people who are contactees or who are abducted. Why do they want to frighten ordinary people by showing them Earth's destruction? All right, that's what I find most frightening, is the abductions. Jim, I don't think your mic's on. Oh, there you go.
It wasn't on. Sorry. You've also done a lot of work in the field of these orbs, and I would like to dedicate a lot more time. We can't talk about that today. I would really like to get into that because that opens up an entire dialogue on orbs, and they've been around a long time. But you were recently on Ancient Aliens. Tell me a little bit about that. What happened on Ancient Aliens?
It was basically when they were putting together an episode on MUFON, they wanted a particular case of interest where they could actually go out in the field and see how a field investigator does their job. And I happen to know that there was a great case in Pennsylvania, out near Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, farmland, where a woman saw a bright light come down late at night, all the crickets stop chirping, which is called the Oz effect. That's usually the result of some sort of strong electromagnetic field, which makes the insects go quiet. The dogs went crazy. She was afraid to go out to see what it was. In the morning, her husband went out and he found it wasn't a crop circle. We call them UFO nests. Okay, it was about perfect circle, about 2 feet. 2 feet in diameter, all around, and there were three smaller circles, 12 inches, 14 inches, 12 inches within the the larger circular area. And when the field investigator, Jay Albertson, went out to investigate it, he broke out in a rash all over his body. Anyway, we took the soil samples. We sent them to the MUFON lab in Missouri, operated by Lynn Mann, one of our field investigators. And it came back that the dirt was full of toxic heavy metals. And what's interesting is that when toxic heavy metals interact with a strong electromagnetic field and a human or an animal's in there, they're going to break out all over their body with sores. And that's what happened to this guy. Thank God it wasn't, gamma ray or X-ray radiation, or he may have died. But that was interesting enough because 7 miles to the east was the Susquehanna nuclear plant, and 7 miles to the west was the General Dynamics ordnance factory where they make missiles. So that proved to be a very interesting case. Unfortunately, Ancient Aliens, I guess, because they didn't want to get into trouble with the government, so they left a lot of interesting parts of that case out. But it still reflected very accurately what a field investigator does in the field, going over with radiation detectors, metal detectors to see if there's trace evidence of metal in the soil, taking soil samples, sending them to our lab. The other interesting thing is that the grass in that area was burned from the inside, which means that there was a strong electromagnetic field there. And we know throughout history that in the past, cars would be affected when they came in contact with UFOs. Not so much today because the wiring insulation is so much better. But in the 1950s and 60s, it would fry a car's electrical system if it came in contact with the UFO's electromagnetic field. So we thought that was an interesting case. Ancient Aliens thought it was an interesting case, and they decided to use that as the centerpiece of the episode.
So, going back to what MUFON is doing now, this year they're going to have the MUFON Symposium. Are you going to be a part of that this year?
I am. This year's going to be in Cincinnati. Actually, it's going to be right across the river from Cincinnati in Covington, Kentucky. A really nice area. And the theme is going to be Friend or Foe 2.0, which I think is particularly relevant with what's going on now. Whoever or whatever may be visiting us, are they here for benevolent reasons? Are they here for malevolent reasons? Or are they just tourists passing through? Are they coming from outer space, time travelers, interdimensional people? We don't know, but that's the questions we're going to be asking at this year's symposium. Are they friend or are they foe? And as I do every year, the last presentation of the symposium will be cases of interest, the best cases from 2022. And the symposium is going to be August 24th to August 27th.
That's great. I see they got some pretty good names coming to the symposium this year. Lou Elizondo, right?
I heard that. Yes, that the lineup's not fully committed yet, but yeah, Lou Elizondo, Avi Loeb is going to be giving a presentation, and David Pilates. I don't know how you say his name.
Dave Pilates.
Great books, by the way. Missing 411, that whole series, they're fascinating set of books. He just joined up, and I can't think of who else off the top of my head. Terry Lynn Kell, who's one of our board members, will be speaking, and that's all I can think of off the top of my head right now.
And that's going to be in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Cincinnati, Covington, Kentucky, they're right next to each other.
Well, that's great. Is there anything else you can tell us about what's going on with MUFON? How How many cases does MUFON do annually? And
Well, we do 10,000 a year average, but the Ancient Aliens episode really skewed the statistics because in 1 month we got 1,000. All right, and 500 of them or more than 500 were abduction type cases. So it real and a lot of them were historical cases that people sat on for 20 years. Once they saw the episode, they say, "Oh, I've got a place to, report what happened to me." And it's like we've been overwhelmed. All right. So this has been a very good year for MUFON so far. We just launched the MUFON Observer Network, which is a social network like Facebook, but for MUFON
Mhm.
members, and we have 1,000 users regularly now on it, and it's growing. We just launched our UFO map app where we do a graphic visualization of MUFON cases on a globe. And right now it's just the CMS. But for members, there's going to be additional levels. NICAP just gave us authorization to take their cases and map them. Okay. Hopefully soon, the Mars database, which is all of the old cases prior to 1995 back to 69, which were done on paper. Hopefully, we'll be figuring out a way to get that out to the public. And also, we have a USO sightings map coming out. So there's a lot of
Oh,
different
really? Okay.
products for MUFON members specifically that will be coming out in the near future. That when you see graphical presentations of cases where you can hit a pin on a map and it opens up the case, and you know people can see that's very enjoyable, and it's going to be free for members, not only in Google but also on a desktop app very soon, probably before summer.
Well, that's great. I'm looking forward to that, by the way. Now, you're also a member of the STAR team, and you're the director of the International Case Assistant Group. So, for the listeners, can you tell them what the STAR team is?
Okay, well, the STAR team is being revamped. It was a team where we'd have certain people throughout the country who could get to a major case within 24 hours, hopefully before the government and the military gets there. So that's the idea behind STAR team. So we're in the middle of revamping that, and hopefully something's going to be coming out about that very soon. But it's pretty much a rapid response team. Uh, I'm actually not in charge of CAG anymore. CAG's under me, but we've finally got a person directly responsible for international CAG, and that's Fred Kohler, who's a field investigator in Pennsylvania. The idea on the international side is that we have countries that have national directors and field investigators, and they do their own cases. Okay, we have national directors in England, Brazil, and a lot of the Canada, Australia, a lot of the major countries, and I oversee those national directors to make sure that they do their cases. CAG and CAG on the United States side and CAG on the international side are the places where we don't have investigators. Small countries like Morocco or Tibet, for example. We have to use a team of our own investigators in the United States, sometimes in Europe, and they have to reach out to these remote places to try to get these cases investigated where we have no boots on the ground. That's why it's called the Case Assistance Group.
Does MUFON have much of a presence in Europe and other?
Oh yeah, Europe, all the major industrialized countries we have a presence in. It's when you start getting into Indonesia and very small African countries, Zimbabwe. We don't have people there. We have one guy for all of Africa. All right. So yeah, it does present the problem to us in second and third world countries.
So we're about out of time. Can you just tell our listeners how to become a MUFON member and how do you become a field investigator?
Okay, very quickly. www.mufon.com is the website to go to. To be a MUFON member is very easy. There's different plans from the simplest $5 a month, $60 a year, to more elaborate plans where you can get a subscription to MUFON TV. Every member gets the MUFON Journal monthly, either by paper copy in the mail or electronically, depending on what membership you want. When you go to MUFON.com, if you have a desire to become a field investigator, and I can tell you it has been one of the most extraordinarily fun things I've ever done. And some of the stories you will hear will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Simply go to MUFON.com, become a member, and you can find the Become a Field Investigator link. You purchase a book. It's about $95 to $110. I don't know the exact price these days. You do an open book test. All right, it goes into mathematics, trigonometry, scientific concepts, using a compass, that type of thing. If you pass the test, you get assigned to a state director or a national director, depending on where you are, and they will start giving you cases to do as a trainee. When you get a couple under your belt, they let you loose on your own, and you basically fill out your investigations electronically on our website.
Perfect. So now you're the Director of Investigations International.
Correct.
You do write articles from time to time in the journal, correct?
Yes, I've had 4 cover stories. I think 6 stories in all. I write the newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks, and I also write for magazines in Europe.
Perfect. So, folks, if you're interested in joining MUFON, www.mufon.com, hit the join button. There must be, okay, like you said. I spent 15 years in MUFON, and I'll tell you, it was, we could talk for hours, Bob. So thank you for joining us tonight. We're out of time. And so on behalf of the Director of Investigations International, Bob Spearing, myself, and my program manager behind the scenes, Patricia Wilkinson, thank you for joining us here on Dark Window. And stay tuned for next week. We'll have another guest. And oh, by the way, Bob, you're going to come back and we're going to talk about these orange orbs.
We are.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim. Take care.
Good night.